Some critics have called Death and the King's Horseman one of the finest works of world drama of the 20th century. The author, Wole Soyinka, is a Nigerian national who became very politically active primarily when he went to England. Growing up in Nigeria, Nigeria was a British colony, and under the rather heavy hand of the fading British Empire's power structure, Soyinka went to school in England, and while he was there, he more or less discovered his Africanness. And that little biographical nugget is significant for him in that his identity is very much wrapped up in being an exile, his literary identity, in that he is between two worlds. He is in many ways a man without a country. He is somebody who grew up in but left Nigeria for England, which is in a way a kind of betrayal, an embrace of the oppressor, a pursuit of a kind of legitimacy or fame that he could not really access so much if he just stayed at home. But when he got there, he discovered that, well, wait a minute, I'm not a proper British gent. I am I'm a black man from Africa. I have all of this tribal heritage that is my experience, and it is completely different from everything I see around me. And so he was foreigner in two different worlds. Now, he goes back and forth between Nigeria, getting involved in politics. Nigeria was going through a very tumultuous time as the British essentially pulled out, and they had some political turmoil, and he spent some time in jail as an agitator. He was locked up for, I believe, at one point, he was locked up a few different times, but one time was for about 3 years, most of which was in solitary confinement. So he joins the list of figures like Nelson Mandela, who fought for liberation in their country as a kind of martyr, and suffered some of the worst human privations because of it. But I think you can make the argument that, well, that time was very critical for him because it gave him an opportunity to reflect. In many cases, he did a lot of writing, and it helped crystallize a lot of his poetic voice. Now, all of that, again, is very interesting and gives you a real sense of the loamy material that he had to draw from as an artist. He's written an awful lot, a lot of plays. He's written novels, he's written essays, he's written poetry. He is in many ways very prolific and more varied in his interests than his countryman and contemporary Chinua Achebe. But Death and the King's Horseman is largely the work that is referenced on the world literary stage today. It was first performed in 1975. It was curiously unique in his among his dramatic works, in that he tended to revise considerably throughout the rehearsal and production period. He He would write a script for performance, and then he would go and he would actually like be involved in the production as a kind of workshop. And he would watch what actors would do. He would watch what directors would do. He would watch what audiences would do, and he would change the script accordingly. Always trying to develop and look at it as a process, taking advantage of the fact that in theater you have that opportunity for instant feedback, for a kind of watching the needle as, okay, this is really hitting, this is not, or maybe that wasn't so clear and I can bone that up a little bit more. This one, Death and the King's Horseman, was not subject to that process. He wrote it when he was in Cambridge. I believe he was teaching there for a spell, and the text was more or less set. And yet you get in it, you get a real sense that he had somewhat mastered his medium in theater, and on the page, it's hard to really appreciate what it can do. There's an awful lot in here that references music that does not come across on the page, but it is crucial to the to any performance of it. There's an awful lot that references sound itself, and that again just does not come across on the page. Just the mere visuals of different settings. He can be relatively descriptive in his stage directions, as opposed to like the Greeks or Shakespeare, who you just have to interpret and guess what they might imagine that people were supposed to be doing as they say the lines. He was really quite explicit about, well, this is going to happen, and this is how it should look, which is more or less what his contemporaries in theater were doing as well throughout the 20th century, getting more and more explicit. But the full production of it is really quite extraordinary in the way that he presents this kind of postmodern critique of the political situation in Nigeria at the time, and he pitches it roughly during World War II. He tags it to a particular incident that a real life incident, and just dwells on that and ruminates on it. It's a fairly stripped down assessment of it. There's not a lot of flab. There's not a lot of business around the story. It's all just a fairly simple excavation of a simple idea. Well, not a simple idea, a very complicated idea, and that is the value of life and the comparative ethics of the two cultures that he straddles, the British and the Nigerian. Important as well to understand is that Nigeria itself was really kind of a confection of the imperialist mission. It was a more or less hodgepodge of rival tribal factions in a fairly broad area of Western Africa. And so within the Nigerian tradition, there are multiple miniature traditions, and you see all of these tribal identities sort of bustling under the surface. So he understood that. So while there's a simple way to go about looking at, well, there's the British way and then there's the Nigerian way. Well, no, it's much more complicated than that. And he treats his material with that respect. The story itself is fairly simple, as I said. There was an incident where a local tribal king had died, and according to tribal custom, at the end of the 30-day mourning period, the king's horseman, one of his tribal chiefs, a high-ranking member of his administration, would commit a ritual suicide to escort the king into the afterlife. And in real life, this happened, and the colonial administrators, the British colonial administrators, or at least one of them, intervened and said, "No, we can't have this. This is barbaric. We're not going to countenance suicide." And he is coming at that from a largely Christian background of the canon against self-slaughter, shall we say? So his ethics are one perspective, but the tribal Yoruba clan, the section or the ruling section of Nigeria at this point, have their tradition, and they say, well, no, this is a great honor that this one man can give himself to his people. And there is this debate that then happens about, well, how do we work this out? Who is right here? Whose ethics do we need to follow? What is the proper response to this problem? And the play just starts with that and explores it, and it does so in a remarkably sophisticated and, I would say, even-handed way. You could say, and critics have said, that the British come in for a little bit of a drubbing on this because they are the interlopers, and this play is coming out, and it's very clearly part of the so-called post-colonial tradition, which is a critical perspective on literature that examines life of colonial power. So it is a literature concerned with power structures, with authority, with very frank racism, with the perspective on so-called third world countries from their empirical overlords, or not empirical, but from the empire, from different empires, different power centers. And this is all leading largely, again, from the work of Edward Said and Orientalism, where he is very concerned with who gets to tell a story and whose perspective is given credence. And so when this comes out, it is part of a tradition. It was not the first play written about this incident. There was another one that was a little bit more clearly British bad guys, Nigerian good guys. This is how they exploited the Nigerians. But Soyinka takes a subtler view of that and complicates that, because the black hat, white hat paradigm doesn't always fit. And in his story, he finds subtleties. In his story, he finds complications and nuance that make it much richer and crack it out of the narrow limitations of post-colonialism to actually view the subjects within this drama as human beings, subject to all of the same blind spots and limitations. The play opens in in this rather large scene of a marketplace in Nigeria, where you get a sense of the local culture, and it is a very, from the evidence of it now, just sitting down and embracing the thing, you get all of these characters coming in. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of moving around. It's a marketplace, and it's a marketplace that is roughly at closing time. So there's a lot of bustle. People are trying to grab the last things off the shelves that they can. Some merchants are trying to pack up. There's a lot going on, and the characters come in and start talking in a very coded dialect almost. It's in English, but they're referencing proverbs and local sayings and cultural contexts that, at first, for a goofy Anglo-American or whatever, it's a little confusing. Like, what are they? What? I don't get what they're saying, because it comes out as a kind of poetry where everything has a meaning that is not necessarily perfectly apparent to everyone. Communication is happening outside the words themselves. And so these characters are coming up and they're talking in these very complicated poetic form that they understand completely within themselves, but we do not. By we, I am just tagging myself in my own perspective. But that's kind of the point, because what is obvious from this first scene is that these people have a very rich culture unto themselves, and that if we don't get it, well, that's kind of on us, and it is incumbent upon us to lean in and try and listen to it, to try and decode it a little bit, so that we can understand what's going on. And that, I think, is a very deliberate choice, to put that out front first, to say to the audience that, okay, some of you are going to get this, and you're going to be like, wow, this is great. I understand everything they're talking about. Some of you will not. But give it some time. You're going to sit there in your seat that you just paid a ticket for, and you have to do some of the work. You need to lean in a little bit. The story itself is that the King's Horseman, Ellison, comes out, and he's in the market, and everybody knows that, well, he's going to go kill himself soon, because this is the tradition. It's just sort of accepted, and he is praised. There's a praise singer who follows him around and praises him, which is, hey, who doesn't like that? And it is all very centered around him, and he is just bathed in the adulation of the public. Significantly, pretty much the entire public, and different productions, I would imagine, can go different ways with this, but on the page, pretty much the entire marketplace is women. It is a female environment, very much so. And you get these characters, these older women, these young girls, and it's very much a female dynamic. And you get the sense of, well, it is a very rich, feminine world. And yet he is just sitting in there basking in all of it. And this becomes particularly acute when, amid all the praise, he brings out this young girl whom he identifies as, this is, she is identified in the cast list as the bride. and she is a young girl, much younger than he is. He seems to be around middle age or so. He has an adult son, so he's not a young man. And this seems to be a young girl of recently marriageable age. So probably a teenager. And his plan is that, well, before I go and kill myself, as I, can't wait to do, I'm going to enjoy the favors, let's say, of this young girl. There is some question as to the savoriness of this outside the whole May-December romance aspect of it, but she is already engaged or married. A little uncertain. The leader of the marketplace, let's say, the lead woman, who is, you get the sense is older and kind of the matriarch figure, says, she already has one step in her husband's home. She is betrothed. And Ellison is not particularly moved by this. In his great self-satisfaction, in this moment of great honor, he declares that I deserve a bed of honor to lie upon. Yeah, but he doesn't want to lie alone to do so. And this gives a sense of, well, okay, he's getting some pushback. The women, particularly the matriarch figure, are a little bothered by this, and they're scolding him for being particularly selfish in this moment when he should be setting an example. And somehow the notion of him essentially taking as a kind of prima nocta this girl who is perhaps already married, and he's going to exercise his kingly prerogative to sleep with her on the first night, essentially, like Gilgamesh, essentially a rape. He is abusing his power. He is wallowing in a kind of selfishness and worldliness and exploiting this young girl. He is the exploiter. Now, this is a drama about global, superpowers supposedly exploiting a country. But within that country, within that culture, within that native, supposedly harmonious culture, we see somebody who is exploiting their power. And that's a subtlety that Soyinka insists upon. This is a lingering problem. Scene 2. After the marketplace closes, scene 2 opens up, and it's in a different locale. The setting is now in the colonial headquarters, so to speak, or the residence. I'm not sure exactly where, but now we have moved from the native realm, from the marketplace, into the halls of British power. And it is remarkably different. It is much easier for the English audience. This was written in Cambridge. It is much easier for the English audience to identify with this. The language itself is much less poetic, much less expressive or expressionistic. It is much more simple. It reads like Noel Coward patter at times. It's just, great. It's just nice dialogue back and forth between a husband and wife and an embarrassed servant, and they have this, like, funny little bits that is very recognizable theater for a British for an Anglo-American, let's say, audience. And the character of the British governor, or whatever, his name is Pilkings. He and his wife are dressed up for a fancy dress party, which is a costume party in British parlance. Again, very, very idiosyncratic use of British and Anglo euphemisms and contrivances in culture that that would tag it as just a different kind of culture, something not universal but idiosyncratic in a different realm. And he and his wife are dressed up as natives, and they don't know it, but they're actually wearing a very significant religious ritual costume having to do with death ceremonies. And when one of their native adjutants comes in, a native official comes in, and he is just, embarrassed to be sitting there. He can't even really look at his boss because his boss is wearing this, this getup, which has great symbolic meaning for the culture. And he is, he's really awkward. He's uncomfortable. And he doesn't want to look. And he's trying to talk to them and tell them about this rumor that's going around that this tribal official is going to commit a ritual suicide. And it's sort of funny, but it's also kind of horrifying because they don't understand. The husband and wife do not understand the cultural significance of what they're exploiting. The symbolism is not hard to grasp. They're doing the tango when they enter, which is a different kind of ritual thing. They are getting dressed up for a visit from the prince. There's going to be a big party, and when the Prince of England comes to visit, it's going to be a different ritualistic, hierarchical ceremony of sorts. And at the beginning of, I think it's Act 4, when he does come in, it is very ritualized in the stage direction, where all the people go quiet, the band is playing, there is music, and they're all turning to watch him enter, and he comes in a certain flourish, of course, and then there is greetings, and it's all very stage managed, all very ceremonial. So it is just a different artifactual referent for the British than for the Nigerians or the Yoruba, and so you get this sort of balance between the two, where we're kind of objectifying both and considering both, and that's the position that the play always puts you in, of just sort of judging between the two. And when the question of the ritual suicide crops up, it is primarily a question of comparative ethics. And Pilkings absolutely does not want this to go through, saying, "Oh wow, it's barbaric that they could do this." And so he goes about trying to stop it, and he especially doesn't like that it's going to interrupt his ceremony. That news of this might unsettle his reception for the prince. But it's the question of comparative ethics, and at one point, Pilkings does say, "Well, we're going to break in, we're going to rush in, we're going to stop this ceremony." And if there's any social unrest, we will meet that unrest with force. To which he is countered in this debate by the natives, by the question. So to save one life, you are willing to sacrifice many? to save the one person's life who's trying to commit suicide, you're willing to shoot down in the street any number of protesters and agitators. That's a curious math. That is a every life is sacred bumper sticker kind of turned on its head. And this question is repeated throughout the play, where we are called on to consider, well, is there a real answer? Is there a compromise? Is there a common ground? How do these seemingly parallel ethic systems function in relation to one another, and do they ever intersect? One point of intersection, you could argue, in these two cultures, not necessarily the ethic systems, but the cultures at large, is in the son of Ellison, Alunde, who is a curious character in this. He was kind of a pet project, you could say, with all derision intended, of Pilkings, who noticed that, well, this young boy seems to be, he's got a good head on his shoulders. And so Pilkings arranged for this young man to go to school back in Britain. I think Cambridge or one of the others, and get a modern education. And this has this upset Ellison, the boy's father, the King's Horseman, who Pilkings did this without consideration that it is the firstborn son of this family that is supposed to inherit this title and duty as the King's Horseman. So it is that boy's job to follow in his father's footsteps and become the next King's Horseman. And by plucking the boy out of that line of succession, if you will, Pilkings has broken that tradition. He has violated their way of life. He has, in their words, the Yoruba proverbs that keep coming up, he has put the world like out of joint or out of its groove. Little senses of the steady functioning of nature are a common refrain throughout. Little proverbs and sayings that give you an idea of their philosophical bent. So he has been sent off to modernize, and he comes back at this point, and he is dressed in a very British suit, and he says, well, yes, I heard that my king had died, and so I immediately booked passage, and I happened to even come in the same retinue, essentially, attached to the prince's travel. So he is there very much ensconced in Britishism, and he is somebody who has, like Soyinka, abandoned his heritage, his obligations to his homeland, let's say, to go back and study in England, to pursue a modern life. But now he's back to honor his father because he knows that, well, this means his father's going to die. He doesn't say what that means in terms of, well, it doesn't really reflect anything on me. So you can see he's really at this fulcrum where his Britishness is splitting off, or at least you're seeing the fault line between his Britishness and his Yoruba heritage, and there is this enormous tension between them. And his one big scene comes with the wife of Pilkings, this character named Jane, who is very much like him, like Pilkings, very British, very, she has no idea that the costume she's wearing could be offensive, essentially wearing blackface. But she is also a voice of some moderation and some sympathy. She eggs her husband on at certain points to be compassionate towards and try and understand and respect the Yoruba traditions that he is sometimes, like a man, plowing over. So she is, again, that feminine voice that bends ever so slightly more towards the native tradition, away from the British imperial authority. So she has this scene with the boy, and at first she starts to confide in him, almost like, oh, well, you've been to England, you look so nice in your suit, you're one of us now. And she is a little put off when he responds somewhat coldly to her. And you get the sense that, well, okay, she was hoping for a little common humanity there, but it's not really taking. He is kind of at war with himself. And in this scene, you get a sense of how the two characters are so close that there is a potential for bridging their distance. There is a potential for finding a common ground. And if any two characters in this drama can, it would be these two. But it doesn't come to pass. They hear drums off in the distance. Music communicates so much about what is going on. Again, sort of a native language that Anglo audiences would have trouble accessing, but is integral and crucial to the performance of the play. But the young man hears a little change in the music that's always off in the distance, and he says, oh, well, that means my dad just did it. My father just committed suicide. He misinterprets the music significantly. His father has not died. It is the authorities have burst in. They have essentially arrested him. They bring him back to the colonial headquarters and lock him up. And there is then this scene where, essentially in a jail cell, he has to defend this way of life, and he starts to get a little edgier there, where we see him at first, he was just basking in the adulation of his people. It becomes a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more, a little uglier side comes out when he's behind jail, and he starts really calling the Pilkings and the British, white man, and he starts spitting out this epithet, and it starts to become a little bit more terse and testy. And you can see he is outraged that his culture has been disrespected in this way. He was not allowed to go through with his duty. And the matriarch of the marketplace character comes in, and she starts lambasting the white officials as well, but also Ellison. Aloha. I believe that's how you pronounce her name, says, "You have betrayed us. We fed you sweetmeats such as we hoped awaited you on the other side, but you said, no, I must eat the world's leftovers. You said you were the hunter who brought the quarry down. To you belong the vital portions of the game. No, you said, I am the hunter's dog, and I shall eat the entrails of the game and the feces of the hunter." She goes through this long list of proverbs and little poetic sayings, again, speaking her more poetic language than the British, just like that marketplace scene, where she just lambasts him for lambasts Ellison for corrupting the role, the dignity of the role that he has been given. He has enjoyed this for his entire adult life. You get a sense, on the condition that the one thing he has to do is perform this ritual sacrifice at the end, where he suffuses his own will, his own identity into that of the community. And she says, well, you know, you failed to do this. You brought this on yourself by demanding recognition of your own needs, by putting your own needs before those of the community in this crucial time. And so you get a sense in there of a kind of stark division within this community that at the moment when it's so easy to just lean back and say, well, the British are the oppressors here, the British are the bad guys. Well, no, there's more division than just the black and the white. Within the black, there are shades, let's say, and they are also fractious. So in this post-colonial work, you get all of these different power centers that are at war with one another, and the audience is invited to observe these and question them on this fairly high plane of ethics and philosophical conception of comparative cultures. But also, you get, in a theater realm, you get these very real people dealing with very real, recognizable emotions. And don't forget, again, the music. The music has a great way of affecting mood and emotions and working on you in a completely non-intellectualized way. So you get all of this wrapping around the audience until the final great tragedy, which is that Ellison learns, with everybody else, that his son, Olunde, has taken his place and committed the suicide that Ellison couldn't carry out. That boy comes back, well, that man comes back from England, the son who had shirked his responsibility. He gets sucked back into that world and tries to assert himself within it, and it only means his own death. You can see that as a tragedy, or you can see that as a grand return, where he does get drawn back into the culture that raised him and celebrates that by giving his life to the community. How you interpret that is a reflection of your own ethics, of your own sensibilities, of your own cultural perspective. But understanding that that is what is at work here, that relativism is a functioning dynamic within this theatrical production. Understanding that gives you the self-reflection, gives you the self-awareness to consider the larger problems at stake here, the broader geopolitical problems of post-colonial world, of fading superpowers and emerging power centers within democratic systems. Nigeria wasn't really democratic at this point, but it was moving in that direction. And all of these problems, in their high philosophical and ethical sense, and in their common human baseline sense of a father's anger at his son for abandoning him, and then fury and suffering for seeing what happens to his son as a result of his own selfishness. It's very intellectual and very emotional. It is high and low. It is British and Yoruban. It is more complex than simple conception will happen. Soyinka does push back frequently, critically, about interpretations of this work that just focus on, well, culture clash, and it's just about this and that, and the British and the Yorubans. And he says, no. Look at the broader picture of it. It's not just that simple, because there are these subtleties, there are all these complications, there are these divisions within the British side, there are these divisions within the Yoruban culture, and overall, the title of the show is Death and the King's Horseman. It's about death. It's about the concept of death, the value of life as opposed to death. Death and life, two opposites again. It's about how you approach these notions of great ethical import. What do you bring to it? What's your cultural perspective? Can you find common ground with alternatives? That's the big idea. It works on a political level, but it also works on a very humanistic and universal level, where we can all recognize the fundamental problems in the divisions that have haunted this world since the beginning of time.